with number 5, in the capital of the Sahara. Mrs. McAllister turned with a sudden eagerness and alarm towards Cecil Thorold. The crowd on the lawn in front of the railings was so dense that only heads could be moved, and she said excitedly, "Sure I can see my ghost across here?" She indicated with her agreeable snub nose the opposite side of the course. "Your ghost?" Cecil questioned, puzzled for a moment by this extraordinary remark. Then the Arab horsemen swept by in a cloud of dust and of thunder, and monopolized the attention of the lawn and grandstand. And the elites de Biskra crammed thereupon and therein. They had one more lap to accomplish for the Prix de la Ville. Biskra is an oasis in the desert and the capital of the Algerian Sahara. 2 days' journey by train from Algeria over the Sahara ranges. It is the last outpost of the Algerian State Railway. It has 160,000 palm trees, but the first symptom of Biskra to be observed from the approaching first-class carriage is the chimney of the electric light plant. Besides the 160,000 palm trees, it possesses half a dozen large hotels, 5 native villages, a fort, huge barracks, and a very ornamental town hall, shops for photographic materials, a whole street of dancing girls, the finest winter climate in all Africa, and a gambling casino. It is a unique thing in oases. It completely upsets the conventional idea of an oasis as a pool of water bordered by a few date palms and the limitless deserts surrounding it. Nevertheless, though Biskra as much resembles Paris as it resembles a conventional idea of an oasis, it is genuine enough, and the limitless desert is, in fact, all around. You may walk out into the desert and meet a motor car maneuvering in the sand, but the sand remains the sand, and the desert remains the desert. And the Sahara, more majestic than the sea itself, refuses to be cheapened by the pneumatic tires of a Mercedes, or the blue rays of electric light, or the feet of English, French, or Germans wandering in search of novelty. It persists in being August. Once a year, in February, Biskra becomes really and exclusively excited, and the occasion is its annual 2-day race meeting. Then the tribes and their chieftains and their horses and their camels arrive magically out of the 4 corners of the desert and fill the oasis. And the English, French, and Germans arrive from the Mediterranean coast with their trunks and their civilization and crowds the hotel till beds in Biskra are precious beyond rubies. And under the tropical sun, east and west meet magnificently in the afternoon on the racecourse to the north of the European Reserve. And the tribesmen, their scraggy steeds trailing superb horsecloths, are arranged in hundreds behind the motor cars and landaus, with a parimutuel in full swing 20 yards away. And the dancing girls, the renowned eau de nails, covered with gold coins and with muslin and high, crude violet, purples, greens, vermilions, shriek and whinny on their benches just opposite the grandstand, where the Western women, arrayed in the toiletries of Worth, Dowsett, and Redfern, quiz them through their glasses. And fringing all is the crowd of adventurers and rascals of 2 continents, the dark and the light, and in the background the palms wave eternally in the breeze. And to the east the Arges mountains, snow-capped, rise in hues of saffron and pale rose, like stage mountains against the sapphire sky. And to the south, a line of telegraph poles lessens and disappears on the verge of the inmost heart of the mysterious and unchangeable Sahara. It was amid this singular scene that Mrs. McAllister made to Cecil Thorold her bizarre remark about a ghost. "What ghost?" the millionaire repeated when the horseman had passed. Then he remembered that on the famous night, now nearly a month ago, when the hotel at Algiers was literally sacked by an organized band of the predators, and valuables to the tune of 40,000 pounds disappeared, Mrs. McAllister had given the first alarm by crying out that there was a ghost in her room. Ah, he smiled easily, condescendingly to this pernicious widow, who had been pursuing him so fruitlessly for 4 mortal weeks, from Algiers to Tunis, from Tunis to Constantine, and from Constantine here to Biskra. All Arabs look more and less alike, you know. But, yes, he said again, they all look alike to us, like Chinamen. Okay. Considering that he himself, from his own yacht, had witnessed a total loss of the Mediterranean of the vessel which contained the plunder and the fleeing band of thieves, considering that his own yacht was rescued, the only 3 survivors of that shipwreck, and that these survivors had made a full confession, and had, only 2 days since, been duly sentenced by the criminal court in Algiers, he did not feel inclined to minister to Mrs. McAllister's feminine fancies. "Did you ever see an Arab with a mole on his chin?" asked Miss McAllister. "No, I never did." "Well, my Arab had a mole on his chin, and that is why I am sure it was he that I saw a minute ago, over there. No, he's gone now." The competing horsemen appeared round the bend for the last time. The dancing girls whinnied on their high treble. The crowd roared, and the Prix de la Ville was won and lost. There was the final race on the card, and the melee which followed. Cecil became separated from his ignorer. She was to depart on the morrow by the 6 a.m. train. "Urgent business," she said. She had given up the chase of the millionaire. "Perhaps she's out of funds. Poor thing," he reflected. "Anyhow, I hope I may never see her again." As a matter of fact, he never did see her again. She passed out of his life as casually as she had come into it. He slowly strolled towards the hotel through the perturbed crowd of Arabs, Europeans, carriages, camels, horses, and motor cars. The mounted tribesmen were in a state of intense excitement, and were continually burning powder in the mad fashion which seems to afford a particular joy to the Arab soul. From time to time a tribesman would break out of the ranks of his clan, and spurring his horse and dropping his reins on the animal's neck, would fire revolvers from both hands as he flew over the rough ground. It was unrivaled horsemanship, and Cecil admired immensely the manner in which, at the end of the frenzied performance, these men, drunk with powder, would wheel their horses sharply while at full gallop and stop dead. And then, as one man who had passed him like a hurricane turned, paused, and then jogged back to his tribe, Cecil saw that he had a mole on his chin. He stood still to watch the splendid fellow, and he noticed something far more important than the mole. He perceived that the revolver in the man's right hand had a chased butt. "I can't swear to it," Cecil mused, "but if that isn't my revolver stolen from under my pillow at the hotel at Algiers on the 10th of January last, my name is Norval, and not Thorold." And the whole edifice of his ideas concerning the robbery at the hotel began to shake. "That revolver ought to be at the bottom of the Mediterranean," he said to himself. "And so ought Miss McAllister's man with the mole, according to the accepted theory of the crime and the story of the survivors of the shipwreck of the Père de Vert." He walked on, keeping the man in sight. "Suppose," he murmured, "suppose all of that stuff isn't at the bottom of the Mediterranean after all." 100 yards further on, he happened to meet one of the white-clad native guides attached to the Royal Hotel, where he had lunched. The guide saluted and offered service, as all the Biskra guides do on occasions. Cecil's reply was to point out the man with the mole. "You see him, Ahmet," he said. "Make no mistake. Find out what tribe he belongs to, where he comes from, and where he sleeps in Biskra, and I will give you a sovereign. Meet me at the casino tonight at 10. Mohammed grinned an honest grin and promised to earn that sovereign. Cecil stopped an empty landing and drove hurriedly to the station to meet the afternoon train from civilization. He had arrived in Biskra that morning by road from Alcantara, and Lucky was coming by the afternoon train with the luggage. On seeing him, he gave that invaluable factum some surprised orders. In addition to Lecky, the millionaire observed among the passengers descending from the train 2 other people who were known to him, but he carefully hid himself from these ladies. In 3 minutes he had disappeared in the nocturnal whirl and uproar of Biskra, solely bent on proving and disproving the truth of a brand new theory concerning the historic sack of the Algiers hotel. But that night he waited in vain for Mohammed at the packed casino, where the Arab chieftains and the English gentlemen alike, in their tremendous calm, were losing money at Sahara with all the imperturbability of stone statues. Part 2. Nor did Cecil see anything of Mohammed during the next day, and he had reasons for not making inquiries about him at the Royal Hotel. But at night, as he was crossing the desert market, Mohammed came up to him on a sudden out of nowhere, and grinning an eternal, honest, foolish grin, and said in his odd English, "I have found him." "Where?" "Come," said Mohammed mysteriously. The Eastern guide loves to be mysterious. Cecil followed him far down the Camorresque street of the Oland Nails, where the tom-toms and the nameless instruments of music sounded from every other house, and the premiers d'Essemias of the Sahara showed themselves gorgeously behind grills, like beautiful animals in cages. Then Mohammed entered a crowded cafe, passed through it, and pushing aside a suspended mat at the other end, bade Cecil to proceed further. Cecil touched his revolver, to make sure of its company, and proceeded further. He found himself in a low oriental room, lighted by an odorous English lamp with a circular wick, and furnished with a fine carpet and 2 bedroom chairs, certainly made of curtain rod. Swordish, room characteristic of Biskra. In one chair sat a man, but this person was not Miss McAllister's man with the mole. He was obviously a Frenchman, by his dress, gestures, and speech. He greeted the millionaire in French, then dropped into English, excellently grammatical, and often idiomatic English spoken with a strong French accent. He was a rather little man, thin, grey, and vivacious. "Give yourself the pain to sitting down," said the Frenchman. "I am glad to see you. You may be able to help us." "You have the advantage of me, Cecil," replied smiling. "Perhaps," said the Frenchman. "You came to Biskra yesterday, Mr. Thorold, with the intention of staying at the Royal Hotel, where rooms were engaged for you. But yesterday afternoon you went to the station to meet your servant, and you ordered him to return to Constantine with your luggage and to await your further instructions. You then took a handbag and went to the casino hotel, and you managed, by means of diplomacy and of money, to get a bed in the Sayed and manager. It was all they could do for you. You gave the name of Collins. Biskra, therefore, is not officially aware of the presence of Mr. Cecil Thorold, the millionaire, while Mr. Collins is free to carry on his researches, to appear and to disappear as pleases him." "Yes," Cecil remarked, "you've got that fairly right. But may I ask—" "Let us come to business at once," said the Frenchman, politely interrupting him. "Is this your watch?" He dramatically pulled a watch and chain from his pocket. "It is," Cecil said quietly. He refrained from embroidering in the affirmative of exclamations. "It was stolen from my bedroom in Algiers, with my revolver, some fur, and a quantity of money, on the 10th of January. You are surprised to find that it is not sunk in the Mediterranean." 30 hours ago I should have been surprised," said Cecil, "but now I am not." "And why not now?" "Because I have formed a new theory, but have the goodness to give me the watch." I cannot, said the Frenchman graciously. Not at present. There was a pause. The sound of music was heard from the cafe. But, my dear sir, I insist, Cecil spoke positively. The Frenchman laughed. I will be perfectly frank with you, Mr. Thorold. Your cleverness in forming a new theory of the great robbery merits all my candor. My name is Sylvain, and I am head of the detective force of Algiers, chef de la Suite. You will perceive that I cannot part with the watch without proper formalities. Mr. Thorold, the robbery at the hotel was a work of the highest criminal art. Possibly I had better tell you the nature of our recent discoveries. I always thought well of a robbery, Cecil observed, and my opinion of it rising. Pray continue. According to your new theory, Mr. Thorold, how many persons were on board the Paraquat Verte when she began to sink? 3, said Cecil promptly, as though answering a conundrum. The Frenchman beamed. You are admirable, he exclaimed. You, instead of 18, there were 3. The wreck of the Paraquat Verte was carefully prearranged. The visit of the boat on the Paraquat Verte off Mustafa Interflay was what you call, I believe, a plant. The stolen goods never left dry land. There are 3 Arabs only on the Paraquat Verte, one to steer her, the other 2 in the engine room. And these 3 were very careful to get themselves saved. They scuttled their ship in the sight of your yacht and another vessel. There is no doubt, Mr. Thorold. The Frenchman smiled with a hint of irony. That the thieves were fully en compte of your doings in the Clarabelle. The shipwreck was done deliberately, with you and your yacht for an audience. It was a masterful stroke. Proceeded almost enthusiastically, for it had the effect not merely of drawing any suspicion away from the true direction, but of putting an end to all further inquiries. Were not the goods at the bottom of the sea, and the thieves drowned? What motive could the police have for further activity? In 6 months, nay, 3 months, all the notes and securities would be safely negotiated, because no measures would have been taken to stop them. Why take measures to stop notes that are at the bottom of the sea? Yes, guilty, we know about you and your masterful strokes. But the 3 survivors who are now in prison, Cecil said. Their behavior, their lying, needs some accounting for. Quite simple, the Frenchman went on. There are 3 in prison for 3 years. What is that to an Arab? He will suffer with stoicism. Say that 10,000 francs are deposited in each of their families. When they come out, they are rich for life. At the cost of 30,000 francs and the price of a ship, say another 30,000, thieves are reasonably expected to obtain absolute security. It's an heroic idea, said Cecil. It was, said the Frenchman, but it has failed. Evidently, but why? Can you ask? You know as well as I do. It has failed partly because there were too many persons in the secret, partly because of the Arab love for display on great occasions, and partly because of a mole on a man's chin. By the way, that was the man I came here to see, Cecil remarked. He was arrested, said the Frenchman curtly, and then he sighed. The booty was not guarded with sufficient restrictions. It was not kept in bulk. One thief probably said, I cannot do without this lovely watch. And another said, what a revolver, I must have it. The Europeans ought to have provided for that. What is they were foolish, the idiots. The idiots, he replied angrily. You seem annoyed. Mr. Thorold, I am at the port in these things. It annoys me to see a fine composition ruined by a bad construction in the 5th act. However, as chief of security, I rejoice. You have located thieves in the plunder? I think I have. Certainly I have captured 2 of the thieves and several articles. The boat lies at... He stopped and looked around. Mr. Thorold, may I rely on you? I know perhaps more than you think of your powers. May I rely on you? You may. You will hold yourself at my disposition during tomorrow to assist me. With pleasure. Then let us take coffee. In the morning I shall have acquired certain precise information which at the moment I lack. Let us take coffee. Part 3. On the following morning, somewhat early, while walking near Macade, one of the tiny outlying villages of the oasis, Cecil met Eve Fincastle and Kitty Satchors, whom he had not spoken with since the affair of the bracelet and brooches, though he had heard from them and had, indeed, seen them at the station 2 days before. Eve Fincastle had fallen rather seriously ill in the town, and the holiday of the two girls, which should have finished before the end of the year, was prolonged. Financially, the enforced leisure was a matter of trifling importance to Kitty Satchors, who had insisted on remaining with her friend, much to the disgust of her London manager. But the journalist's resources were less royal, and Eve considered herself fortunate that she had obtained from her newspaper some special descriptive correspondence in Algeria. It was this commission which had brought her and Kitty with her, on the natural course of the Algerian tour, to Biskra. Cecil was charmed to see his acquaintances, for Eve interested him, and Kitty's beauty, goes without saying, dazzled him. Nevertheless, he had been, as it were, hiding himself, and in his character as an amateur of the loot of cities, he would have preferred to have met them on some morning other than that particular morning. "You will go with us to Sadie Yorktown, won't you, today?" said Kitty, after they had talked a while. "We've secured a carriage and a donkey drive in the real true desert." "I'm sorry I can't," said Cecil. "Oh, but—" Fincastle began and stopped. "Of course you can," said Kitty imperiously. "You must. We leave tomorrow. We're only here for 2 days. In Algiers and France, another 2 days in Paris, and then London, my darling London, and work. So it's understood." "It desolates me," said Cecil, "but I can't go with you to City Oak today." They both saw that he meant to refuse them. "Well, that settles it, then," Eve agreed quietly. "You're horrid, Mr. Thorold," said the bewitching actress. "And if you imagine for a single moment you haven't seen that you've been keeping out of our way, you're mistaken. You must have noticed us at the station. Eve thinks you've got another of your—" "No, I don't, Kitty," Eve said quickly. "If Miss Fincastle suspects that I've got another of my—" he paused humorously. "Miss Fincastle was right. I have got another of mine. I threw away myself with magnanimity. I'm staying in Biskra under the name of Collins, and my time, like my name, is not my own." "In that case," he remarked, "we will pass on." And they shook hands with a certain frigidity in the part of the two girls. During the morning, M. Sylvan made no sign, and Cecil lunched at solitude at Dar F, adjoining the casino. The races being over, the streams of natives in their tents and their quadrupeds were leaving Biskra for the desert. They made an interminable procession that could be seen from the window of the Dar F coffee room. Cecil was idly watching the procession when a hand touched his shoulder. He turned around and saw Adenra. "Monsieur Collins?" questioned the garçon. Cecil assented. "Voulez-vous avoir de l'audience de la soirée, monsieur?" Cecil obediently followed, and found in the street M. Sylvan, well wrapped up and seated in an open carriage. "I have need of you," said M. Sylvan. "Can you come at once?" "Certainly." In 2 minutes they were driving away together into the desert. "Our destination is Sidi Okva," said M. Sylvan. "Luxurious place." The road, so called, led across Biskra River, so called, and then to a straight line eastwards. The river had about a depth of a dinner plate. As for the road, in some parts it not merely failed to be a road, it was nothing but virgin desert. Intact, at its best it was a heaving and treacherous mixture of sand and pebbles, through which, and not over which, the two unhappy horses had to drag M. Sylvan's unfortunate open carriage. M. Sylvan drove himself. I'm well acquainted with this part of the desert, he said, and we have strange cases sometimes, and when I am on an important business, I never trust an Arab. By the way, you have a revolver. I did not anticipate danger, but I have one, said Cecil, and it is loaded. Cecil took the weapon from his hip pocket and examined it. It is loaded, he said. Good, exclaimed the Frenchman, and then he turned to the German, who had recently sitting impatiently as the leaps and bounds of the carriage would allow, on a small seat immediately behind the two others, and demanded of him in French whether his revolver was also loaded. The man gave an affirmative, respectful confirmation. Good, said Sylvan, again, and launched into a description of the wondrous gardens of the Comte de Landon, whose walls and the confines of the oasis they were just passing. Straight in front could be seen a short line of palm trees, waving in the desert breeze under the desert sun, and Cecil asked what they were. Oh, Sidi Okba, replied Sullivan. The 180,000 palms of the desert city of Sidi Okba. They seem near to you, no doubt, but we shall travel 20 kilometers before we reach them. The effect of nearness is due to the singular quality of the atmosphere. It is a 2 hours journey. Then do we return at the dark? Cecil repaired. If we are lucky, we may return at once and arrive in Biskra by dusk. If not, well, we shall spend the night in Sidvilka. Do you object? Not at all. A curious place, observed Sylvan. Soon they had left behind the trace of the oasis, and were in the real, true desert. They met and passed native equipages and strings of camels, and from time to time, either at hand a short distance could be seen from the road the encampments of wandering tribes. And after interminable joltings, of which Sylvan, his guest, and the gendarme were frequently hurtled at one another's heads with excessive violence, the short line of palm trees began to seem a little nearer and to occupy a little more of the horizon. And then they could descry the wall of the city, and at last they reached its gate, and the beggars squatting within its gates. Descend, Sullivan ordered his subordinate. The man disappeared, and Sullivan and Cecil drove into the city. They met several carriages of Biskra visitors, just setting forth on the return journey. And insisting that Sidi Okra was the curious place, Sullivan did not exaggerate. It is an eastern town of the most antique sort, built solely of mud, with the simplicity and foulness that smells, and they avowed that the secret horrors which might be expected in a community which has not altered its inhabitants in any particular for 1,000 years. During several months of each year, it was visited daily by Europeans. Its mosque is the oldest Mohammedan building in Africa, therefore no respectable tourist dares to miss it. And yet it remains absolutely uninfluenced by European notions. The European person must take his food with him. He is allowed to eat it in the garden of a cafe, which is European as far as its sign, and its counter, but no further. He could not eat in the cafe itself. This cafe is a mark which civilization has succeeded in making the city Okba in 10 centuries. As Cecil drove Sullivan through the narrow, winding streets, he acutely felt the east closing in upon him, and since the sun was getting low over the palm trees, he was glad to have the detective by his side. They arrived at the wretched cafe. A pair-horse vehicle with the horses' heads towards Biskra was waiting at the door. Unspeakable lanes, fetid, winding, sinister, and strangely peopled, led away in several directions. Sullivan glanced about him. We shall succeed, he murmured cheerfully. Follow me. And they went into the mark of civilization, and saw the counter and a female creature behind the bar, and through another door a glimpse of a garden beyond. Follow me, murmured Sullivan again, opening another door to the left into a dark passage. Straight on. There is a room at the other end. They vanished. In a few seconds, Sullivan returned into the cafe. Part 4. Now, in the garden were Eve Fincastle and Katie Sartoris, frying up some wraps preparatory to their departure for Biskra. They caught sight of Cecil Thorold and his companion entering the cafe, and they were surprised to find the millionaire in City Opera, after his refusal to accompany them. Through the back door of the cafe, they saw Cecil's companion reappear out of the passage. They saw the creature behind the counter stoop and produce a revolver, then offer it to the Frenchman in a furtive moment. They saw that the Frenchman declined it, and drew another revolver from his own pocket and winked. And the character in the wink given in the Frenchman to the woman made them turn pale under the sudden knife-like thrust of an awful suspicion. The Frenchman looked up and perceived the girl was in the garden, and at one glance for Kitty's beauty was not enough for him. "Can you keep him here for a minute while I warn Mr. Thorold?" said Eve quickly. Kitty Sartoris nodded and began to smile on the Frenchman, and then she lifted her finger beckoningly. If millions had depended on his refusal, it is doubtful whether he would have resisted the charming gesture. Not for nothing did Kitty Sartoris receive 100 a week in the Regency Theatre. In a moment the Frenchman was talking to her, and she had enveloped him in the golden mist of enchantment. Guided by profound instinct, Eve ran to the passage and into the room where Cecil was waiting the return for his M. "Come out," she whispered passionately, as if of violent anger and dreadful alarm. "You are trapped, you with your schemes." "Trapped?" he exclaimed, smiling. "Not at all. I have my revolver." And his hand touched his pocket. "By Jove, I haven't. It's gone." The miraculous change in his face was the highest interest. "Come out," she cried. "Our carriage is waiting." In the cafe, Kitty Sartoris was talking to the Frenchman. She stroked his sleeve with her gloved hand, and he, the Frenchman, still held the revolver which he had displayed to the woman at the counter. In spite of the consummate and swiftly aroused emotion of the moment, Cecil snatched the revolver, and the three friends walked hastily to the street, jumped into the carriage, and drove away. Already as they approached the city gate, they could see the white tower of the Royal Hotel of Biskra shining across the desert like a promise of security. The whole episode had lasted perhaps 2 minutes, but there were minutes of such intense and blinding revelation Cecil had never before expected. He sighed with relief as he lay back in the carriage. "If that's the man," he meditated, astounded, "who must have planned the robbery at the hotel? If I never suspected it, I never suspected that his goddamn was a sham. I wonder whether his murder of me would have been as leisurely or artistic as a method of trapping me. I wonder. Well, this time I've certainly enjoyed myself." Then he gazed at Eve Fincastle. The women said nothing for a long time, and even then the talk was of trifles. Part 5. Eve Fincastle had gone up to the vast flat roof of the Royal Hotel, and Cecil, knowing that she was there, followed. The sun had just set, and Biskra lay spread out below them in the rich autumn light which already, eastwards, had turned to sapphire. They could still see the line of palm trees of City Opera, and in another direction the long, lonely roads of figures, stretching across the desert like a rope which had been flung from heaven on the waste of sand. The Argiers mountains were black and jagged. Nearer, immediately under them, was the various life of the great oasis, and the sounds of that life. Human speech, the rattle of carriages, the grunts of camels in the camel enclosure, the whistling of an engine at the station, the melancholy wails of hawkers, ascended softly into the twilight of the Sahara. Cecil approached her, but she did not turn towards him. "I want to thank you," he started. She made no movement, and then she suddenly burst out. "Why do you continue with these shameful plots and schemes?" she demanded, looking always steadily away from him. "Why do you disgrace yourself? Was this another theft, another blackmailing, another affair like that in Ostend? Why?" She stopped, deeply disturbed, unable to control herself. "My dear journalist," he said quietly, "you don't understand. Let me tell you." He gave her his history, from the night summons of Miss McAllister to make same that afternoon. She faced him. "I'm so glad," she murmured. "You can't imagine." I want to thank you for saving my life, he said again. She began to cry. Her body shook. She held her face. But, he stammered awkwardly. It wasn't I who saved your life, she said, sobbingly passionate. It wasn't beautiful enough. Only Kitty could have done it. Only a beautiful woman could have kept that man. I know all about it, my dear girl, Cecil silenced her disavowal. Something moved him to take her hand. She smiled sadly, not resisting. You must excuse me, she murmured. I'm not myself tonight. Because of the excitement. And anyhow, I'm glad you haven't taken any loot this time. But I have, he protested. He was surprised to find his voice trembling. What? This, he pressed her hand tenderly. That? She looked at her hand, lying in his, as though she had never seen it before. Eve, he whispered. About 2/3 of the loot of the hotel robbery was ultimately recovered, and not at Sidio Ubka, but in the cellars of the hotel itself. From first to last, that robbery was a masterpiece of audacity. Its originator, the same distance, Sullivan, head of the Algiers detective force, is still at large.